Genuine conversations with unique minds on the threats, the complexity, and the geopolitics shaping our world. This is the Entropy Podcast with Francis Gorman. Hi everyone, welcome to the Entropy Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. Before we dive in, if today's conversation challenges you, sparks a new idea, or sharpens how you think about the world, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who enjoys staying curious. Today I'm joined by Rahim Hirji, the author of SuperSkills, the 7 Human Skills for the Age of AI, and the founder of SuperSkills Intelligence Company. Rahim is a London-based keynote speaker and advisor who helps leaders and organizations build the human capability to thrive alongside AI. Rahim has worked in more than 200 organizations across 30 countries on 6 continents, from financial services and technology to education, healthcare, and the public sector. Rahim, it's lovely to have you here with me today.
Francis, I've been looking forward to this podcast for the last few weeks and glad to be here.
So have I, Rahim. Ever since we kind of had our brief conversation, that alone sparked a lot of questions and ideas that have been fermenting in my mind. So I'm looking forward to unraveling them with you. So I want to ask, Rahim, just to kind of get us going here, what does it mean to be valuable in a world where intelligence has become abundant?
So, I think if you take a step back, intelligence now, it feels like it's a commodity, right? It's at our fingertips. And, I try and get people to think back to, many, many years ago when you used to have these scribes that used to write on animal skin, right? With quills. And they used to be able to write 3 words, 3 words an hour, right? Even, 3 words a minute. And they'd get to like maybe a page or it would take them almost a year to write a book, and then they'd have to think about how that would be distributed. And you think about that, that was basically intelligence that they were trying to farm out to others, and that's obviously got faster over the years. I'm now talking into kind of voice apps, and instead of doing three words a minute, I'm doing 180 words a minute because that's what the app tells me. So there's a lot of the speed has kind of happened, but really it's not really about what we're doing. All of this stuff is being crunched up using all of the LLMs. They're taking all of the data, all of the knowledge, all of the intelligence that they have been trained on. They're putting that into their systems, and we are using them. So I mentioned we're talking about this as a commodity now. Not everyone is using it in that way. And so the premium has changed. It's no longer about the actual intelligence. There may be layers around it, but really, I think about the decision making, the judgment. And I was talking to a group the other day, and they said, what's really valuable now? And I said, what's really valuable is taste, because everything kind of seems the same these days, and what's different is your own personal opinion on certain things. Whether you like something, whether you don't like something, whether you think something's good, whether you think something's bad. So, judgment, taste, accountability. Those are the things. When intelligence is abundant, we've got to look at other places, and that's where I think things are really kind of valuable now.
I like that idea of taste, because I do think there is this blandness or this sameness creeping into the internet, and you can feel it. It's almost abrasive.
Exactly. It's like you get these Spider-Man has these spidey senses, right? You kind of know when you've got a reply back from someone on an email whether they've used AI or not. Immediately because you've got the spidey senses. And sometimes it's okay because there's a pretty basic email and you just want to get something across. But sometimes people are trying to have a conversation with you and they're going back and forth, and it just feels disingenuous, right? Because it feels as if you're talking to a machine rather than a real human being, and sometimes you're not sure whether it's truthful, or if it's real or what. And that's the world that we're in right now.
It's very true. It's almost like you're talking to someone and they're scrolling on their phone whilst talking back to you. It feels somewhat arrogant, And I want to unravel this slightly. So there's an idea growing that AI makes human skills more important. Is that actually true, or is there a different reality starting to play out?
Yeah, I mean, so this is really about the crux of my book, SuperSkills. I think it's half true, right? Because you can say there's you can use AI every day, every minute of every day, but if you don't lean into your human skills, they're just going to just going to erode, right? They're not going to get any better. You've got to lean in and you've got to be more human for them to take off. So in a very simple example, I use one of teamwork, right? If you don't continue to work in a team, you don't know what it means about the nuance of agreement and disagreement and where you need to change and getting to an end goal. Whereas if you're working in a team all the time, you're learning that the nuance, and you get that bond within other people. So I think my personal view is that AI has become this leveler where everyone is stepping up to a certain level, and then you get these kind of human skills. But you've really got to invest in them I guess to get the best out of human beings. There's a couple of things that I wanted to just throw at you if you don't mind. There's a concept that I mentioned to leadership teams and corporates, which is called synthetic seniority, and people love it because it puts a name on something that they haven't they've been feeling within the organization, and it's with where you get people who look senior because they've been using AI to come up with new ideas and actually put them at the table with someone who's very senior. So someone who's maybe got 1 or 2 years experience, they're using AI, they're very good at using AI, and you know what, if I was in their shoes, I would probably be doing the same thing. But what happens is they've been using this tech, and then when they get to that level, they're able to have a conversation, but they don't know the natural flow of what's happening. And so when things go wrong, what happens is there's this vacant area where they're not able to qualify how they've got to that point. It's kind of worrying because they haven't got the wisdom in there, and so we're in this kind of new era where you've got to have people who are working together. So those who are kind of AI proficient with those who are not so AI proficient together, bringing that wisdom from the old world and new world is going to be really powerful. But if you separate those two and put them in competition, it becomes like a kind of a fork, not really a trend.
I like that synthetic seniority. I've been using the term brittle intelligence.
Oh right, okay.
Because
That's it's falling apart a little bit.
Yeah, because I see it all the time. People come into a room, they've formed out what good looks like, and when you take the viewpoint that you fell on your face on 5 years previous and put it in the room, they go silent because it's a hypothesis they're not familiar with. So yeah, no, I like that. I like that synthetic seniority. I might swap out my brittle intelligence with that one. It sounds a bit more elegant. I, I I think one thing I want to think about is you're looking at the skills that are going to sustain. Can you give me a viewpoint, Raheem, on what the most important skills are going to be into the future, and what are skills that we should be looking at in terms of our education system? Do we need to make changes there?
There are lots of different views, and there's this structure of the education system is very difficult. I'd love to go and redesign the education system from scratch and say this is what we need to do. There are some great education systems out there, and you know, Minerva is a university you may have heard of. It's a great university and great system. There's one that's set up in London. It's called the London Interdisciplinary School. It's a relatively new university, and they teach things in a completely different way. And they've been able to redesign what the education system is, and teaching the kind of some of the super skills in there. How do you be more curious within your day to day? And my super skills are things like curiosity, being adaptable, and and having empathy, right? These things I think are really important. And the education system does bring some of those things in. You're still going to need your math skills. You're still going to need your literacy skills, all of those things. But I have built in my book, and you might have seen it in the introduction to this. I have created these new levels of skills, which start with survival skills. How do you survive in the workplace these days? And literally survival in the old days was like, how do you stay alive, right? Now it's about in the workplace, or if you're in education, you need to learn about how do you maintain your job, how do you do well in that area. I've got the second level, which is I call it street skills. How do you get your project on the agenda? How do you get your voice to be heard? Those are street skills. You could have things like learning the language of work. Those kind of things exist. And then there are things that we have known for many years, right? And it's really been the bet of education, where we have invested all of our time and money in going through the education system, sometimes spending a lot of money going into higher education, with the bet that you'd have this job or this vocation. That's my third level, and I call it specialist skills. And then soft skills, which we have been talking about for the last 20 years or so. Critical thinking is absolutely important for anyone in this day and age, especially in the world of AI. And then I've got my layer of super skills, as we mentioned. So I think it's interesting that we've taken a bet on the middle layer, which is special skills to be able to do a job. And now what's at risk is that middle layer, because he's put all of this money in there, but actually the jobs are changing. So the bet that you made to do the job that you wanted to do, that you might have been doing for the rest of your life, that job might not be there because it's being pulled apart, tasks are being changed. And so if that was the case, and you believe that to be true, and I've seen a number of different job roles completely change, and I'm sure you have as well, and we talk about it all the time. If you believe that to be different now, you take a step back and you say, okay, what do we need to educate for, right? It's very simple. This is like 2 + 2, right? It's very simple for me that we need to look at what we have from the education system. Now, I don't have the kind of 100% solution, but I think we have these kind of five layers, right? And the interesting thing is those bottom 2 layers, we've never had a certificate for, right? You never have a certificate for having survival skills and understanding the nuance of work, understanding when your boss says that's fine or that's fine, right? So there's this kind of like things that you just don't know, and you need to understand that. Similarly, you need these kind of new ways of working with the machine, right? So in some point you're going to have an AI employee with you in the workplace. At some point you might have an AI overlord or a boss who you're going to have to work with. These are things that are alien to us right now, and we need to take a bet on some of those areas, and that would mean we change what we do and what we educate, right?
The AI boss one. Now that's
the AI overlords. That's what I call
overlord. That is scary. I think in some senses in my personal life for my podcast, I already have AI employees that are doing different jobs to allow me to do my day job, so I can also do this. So I can visualize that. I just can't visualize reporting into an overlord.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be pretty scary because I'm sure there'll be all about efficiency, right?
Yeah, and checking my team status, which isn't great. Is there skills, Rahim, that we think today are super important, that we kind of build our core belief system around, that you think will not sustain over the next decade?
Well, that's a tough question. Let me take that a slightly different way, right? So we have for many years operated in the workplace doing certain things, and those certain things might be writing reports. We used to write minutes for meetings. We used to provide actions on these meetings. And some of these things are repetitive, right? The way that I would look at now, and this will be different in many different fields, is what is repetitive that you can take away, and what is the machine better at? So instead of looking at the specific skills around that, I think you look at the workplace and you say, what is the busy work that you don't need anymore? And I've been on podcasts that we've talking about. We used to spend hours like on PowerPoints, right? You used to look at these PowerPoints and used to move them and making sure that they're all aligned. No one cares about that anymore, because you just press a button and it's done, and the whole deck is created for you with basically your knowledge base on the deck, right? Equally, sometimes you just don't need the report anymore, because you can churn out the report using some of these LLMs. So the question is, like, what is going to be most valuable in the workplace, and then you work back from that and say, okay, these are the things that you need to focus on. So the busy work is going away, and the stuff that you need your brain for becomes more important. And I think last time we were talking about what about kids, right? And what parents should teach that schools don't. And I was thinking about this in great detail, because it was interesting when we talked about it. And my thing was how to be bored. How do you sit with a problem without going to AI? And people find that difficult now, right? So you've become defaulted to using the tech. It might have been a Google Doc that you were using before, and now you might be going to Claude, or you might be going to ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, or insert LLM of choice. And so I would take a step back and say, okay, you've got all of these devices. How do you sit in a room, 2 or 3 individuals having a discussion, no tech, and see what happens? And that's not just for kids. That's for adults in the workplace. When you're trying to solve problems, step away from all of these different areas and really kind of say, okay, we have got these superpowers available to us, but let's figure out exactly what it is that we want, and then you can go to the tech.
Yeah, no, I think that triggered a lot of thinking for me the last day. The solitude. I try very hard not to give my kids devices, which sounds completely counterintuitive from my work and what I put out there. But I do think it's important that they develop their creativity, their imagination, that sort of thing. So, I'll send them out in the field to go hunt for dragons and stuff, just to get them going,
Man, when we were kids, we used to be bored all the time, right? And we used to do whatever it was, whether it's get on our bike and ride somewhere, or figure out what it was that we could do with less choice. We might have had Lego, right, back in the day. Lego still exists now, but it's like, one potential opportunity of 100. Whereas I think when we were growing up, we had 1 or 2 choices of things that we would play, and we would play the same games, and we would still have fun. And even with Lego, I like to use the example of Lego because it's you can create lots of different things. You may have had the instructions to build out a building, but actually you could use the same Lego set to build out a car, right?
It's very true. And I think this is so important that remove the distraction, let the creativity grow, and the creativity, allows you to branch out different ideas. And I suppose that's where the curiosity comes from then, because if you can't get bored and you don't have creativity, then you can't envision a different future, which is, it's an interesting hypothesis. And I think it's really important to kind of say it out loud, even though it sounds quite sensible.
Yeah. When you do think it through, you're just following the default, right? If you haven't got the curiosity, you just like do what you're told to do, or you do what you think the rules are, and that's pretty boring, sad existence, right? Oh, I'm going to turn up to work, and I'm going to take my bag to work, and I'm going to do this between 9 9 and 12, and then I'm going to have 1 hour for lunch, and then I'm going to continue doing these things. And sometimes, like, what are you doing, and why are you doing it, right? So I like to get people to think about, why are you having certain meetings from a basic perspective, why you think certain metrics are important in the workplace. There's all of these things. Ask the question, why are we doing certain things? And I remember there used to be people in organizations I used to work with, and they used to ask these questions all the time, and we're trying to get things done, and like, stop asking the questions. Actually, I want those people in my team right now to ask the question, why are we doing this in this way? Even if you've got a target at the end of the week.
I think we were talking about this the last time we spoke as well, and kind of when somebody made a decision and that decision was kind of made for you. I think we talked about 30-minute meetings with some guy in in Google decided 30 minutes seems like a good amount of time for a meeting. Can you talk to me about the decisions in our life that we've already given to AI without realizing, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean um, the Google Calendar one is the obvious one. A product manager deciding that a meeting should be 30 minutes or an hour, and that's the easiest thing that you should do, right? That's the obvious thing. But we see it every day. The obvious ones are Spotify and Netflix, and your Netflix will be different to my Netflix, right? But the one, and I'm really open to it now because I use Google Maps all the time. But there is a direction. You're going to a certain destination, and I'm meeting someone for brunch today, and you see all the different options in London of all of the different tube lines you could take, or you could take a bus, or you could walk from certain areas. And sometimes I'm driving on the motorway, and things change. And sometimes you're thinking, well, why am I following this route? Are we 100% sure that it is the right route? And who is it right for? Is it right for me to get there quicker? Is it right for me to get there with the least spend on petrol or gasoline? Is it right for the people to kind of manage traffic? Who is it right for, right? So there's all of these questions I think you need to ask. And I've fallen into the trap where I've taken a route because Google Maps has told me to do that. And I knew at the back of my head that route was closed. I knew that the road was closed, but I still went down that route because I just said, okay, Google says to go that way. And whether it's Google, whether it's Apple, and I think if you ask the question of what are you doing on a day-to-day basis, you realize that there are a lot of decisions that have been made for you by algorithms, right? And those algorithms have been trained by humans, right, in the outset. And so it's important to ask the question of, well, why does your post arrive at a certain time? Who decided that the postman comes to your place at this time? The algorithm deciding when a parcel arrives. There's so many different things in the world. When you're open to it, you'll realize, okay, I need to make some decisions for myself now.
The Google Maps one really got me because after we spoke the last day, I closed on my laptop, I got in the car, I turned on Google Maps, I put in the office I was going to, I took off on my journey. It said recommended best route, and I said, no, I'm going to make a decision here. I'm going to go the other route. It took me 15 minutes longer to get there, and I missed the first 10 minutes of my meeting. so I learned my lesson.
So maybe I was wrong then, but I mean the other thing is, like, there's sometimes it's nicer to have. Do you need to get there faster? What is the priority? Sometimes you get have a nicer route, or sometimes you're actually building your cognition by going down certain areas. I used to be very bad at driving around London back in the day, and then I was, oh great, we've got sat navs now, and I can follow this route. But cognitively, I don't know where different neighborhoods were and are, and I have to look at a map now. And I feel that because of sat navs, because of Google Maps, I haven't built some brain capacity from my abilities to know where I am. Right.
I think that's really important. How do you know when you become over dependent on AI or the technology, in this case, the sat nav?
Yeah, good question. There's the thing that I'd say is when you don't know when the answer is wrong. So if you're going somewhere, or if you're using I would say you're using an LLM and you become overly dependent on it. If you don't know when certain bits of it are wrong, or if you haven't questioned it, or if you're accepting the first draft, right, without even thinking about it, or you're just continuing to kind of move through everything, then that becomes a very dangerous situation. There's the example of Air France 447, where they were flying between Rio and Paris. And there's this concept, there's this concept called the Children of the Magenta Line, right? And I think it's in my book, in my augmented mindset skill, where the pilots could fly on automation, but when something went wrong with the engine, they started to struggle. So they didn't know what was wrong, and they also didn't know what they needed to do, because they've become so dependent on the machine, and they thought the machine was doing this all the time. And so if you take a step, and what happened is a lot of people died in that situation. But the way that I would say that we should really think about this type of situation is, if you don't know, if you don't know whether you're right or wrong in a certain situation, go back to what you were doing. And I think you'll know the term in kind of project management and tech. We call it the old school term of parallel pathing. Right, it's a very old school methodology of like doing two things at the same time. And I would say do two things at the same time, so you don't become overly dependent on the stuff that is automated. Because what it does is it gets you to think, okay, here's the friction of stuff that I know, here's a situation of things that are right, here's the situation of things that are wrong. And it might be that you are doing some research using Claude. Actually, does it look right? Actually, let me go and do some research using old school Google and see what comes up. Actually, let me build that out myself whilst doing Claude. And actually, it's so important to get it right in the beginning that I have this phrase that I call human at the start, right? So really thinking about the problem yourself first before you start using certain areas. So to step away from over dependence or drift, right? I call it drift, algorithmic drift, is to really step away from it, parallel path what it is that you are doing, and use your human intuition right in the beginning.
I think that's great advice. I want to skip back to, we talked about kids there for a while, and I was outside yesterday and I was watching my 14-month-old. I think he was trying to eat clay, but that's a whole different it's a whole different problem. But he's always getting himself into the next adventure, the next bit of trouble. He's exploring, etc. But as we get older, and I think you touched this earlier, you get your bag, you go to work, you stop for an hour for lunch, you get into this mundane routine, you go home, you feed the kids, you put in the bed, you go to bed yourself, you get up, you do it all over again. It's like the curiosity evaporates. Does curiosity need to be taught, and does it need to be practiced, or are we losing it?
So the obvious answer is, I think you need to teach yourself to ask the questions all the time. Whether it's Simon Sinek and you ask him why all the time, but you really need to practice it. I mean, I see it time and time again, and I've seen it in myself as well. It's very easy to outsource and get the cheat code and do things separately. So just by your was it your son or your daughter?
Son.
Your son. So if your son's playing around and figuring out things, he's learning curiosity, he's learning that trait, and you're leaving him to figure things out by himself at that age. I think at our age it becomes even more important to draw that hard line and say, hey, we're going to do this. I personally am going to look into this myself. I'm going to figure out what it is. And there's the question of what is the fastest way to rebuild it? Because I know people have fallen into the trap, and they're saying, you said to me that curiosity is a super skill, and I'd say to everyone that I'm curious, but I think I've become really lazy. How do I do that? And I'd say just take away the things that have become default from your life, at least for a time, so you know what you've lost. If you've lost the ability to kind of brainstorm and or even draw a mind map and see if you can come up with the 5 or 6 things. What I try and do is, instead of using Claude, I'll try and create a mind map and say, okay, here are 5 or 6 different areas, and see if I can beat Claude or ChatGPT on the different areas that I'm trying to think through, and see what I'm missing. That kind of flip on how do you rebuild the curiosity in this AI age is really, really important, and it's not just a one-off. It's like, okay, let's do this on a regular basis. We have these great tools. Like I think we're we're living in this age where we have got so much that we can do. We're gonna this AI for good. We can do so much good with the technology that we've got available to us now. But at the same time, you need to really realize, when is it good to use the tech, and when is it good to not use the tech. So I'm the proponent of human plus AI. It can be very, very powerful. But also, there's a time and a place for certain things. And so I'd say, when you're thinking about curiosity, when you're thinking about rebuilding curiosity, it's about taking that step back.
How much time did you spend writing your book, and how important was that to kind of creating some of these revelations that were almost blatantly in front of you all the time, but not until you started kind of scratching at the surface did they come a reality?
Do you want to break that down a little bit more for me?
So what I mean, what I mean is, we spend a lot of our day and we're busy, but to write your knowledge down requires you to take space. It requires you to tap into a part of the brain you don't access on a day-to-day basis. And I often find, when I'm doing strategy work and I kind of block out the noise and start putting this down, things that were blatantly apparent in front of me reveal themselves in a way that I would never have expected. And then it's almost like I can grow or draw synergies between things that weren't visible before. So I was kind of wondering, when you went through the process of the book, did a lot of these revelations come to you? Were the things that you had identified, or the new patterns kind of materialized that you were like, this is so obvious, I never saw it this way before?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say I'm a bad author. It's like I thought I had a plan, but I didn't really have a plan. So my the concept of super skills actually came from many years ago, when I was in China, and I'd seen machine learning algorithms being used within edtech, and it scared the crap out of me. And I said, okay, I've got to write about this. But I didn't really understand AI at that point. And so I taught myself the concepts, what it meant. I was looking at emerging technology in a big way. And I thought I had like a kind of view on it. And, we needed ChatGPT to come out, and for me to really understand and think about where this sat. And as I sat down to write, I thought okay, I'm going to just brain dump this stuff down. And I knew it had to be story driven. I knew conceptually there were themes that I needed to pull out of what was happening. But really, you need the space away from technology, away from all of the things that are going on in the world. And my writing style, I think that I've been writing this newsletter called Box of Amazing for the last 10 years. Every Sunday I ship something. It's about between 1,000 and 3,000 words. And it's really about me conceptualizing an idea and sharing it with others. So I've taught myself. So I know I could write the 1,000 to 3,000 word essay, but I hadn't really learned the art of having this, 70,000, 80,000 word thesis, really, that becomes readable, and also has has value to people. And so what I was doing was I was just noting down every single thing and just putting it in a Google Doc. And there was a temptation of just like, can I crunch this using AI? But I just knew that this is as a book. If I was going to do that, and the whole point of being human was that would be a dangerous place to be. But what I did do is I did use AI to do a lot of research and get access to things that I didn't even think were available. But and what that did was it started to crystallize some of these ideas that I had. I looked into the half-life of skills, for example. That there's a concept that our technical skills are the half-life is reducing very quickly. I came up with this model of drift versus design, which people love, and trying to understand the concept of agency around your own decisions, talking about things like judgment. And once you start getting your ideas down, and once you start conceptualizing them, and you start saying, I need to apply this to something that's real, that's the thing that I think really kind of made it applicable in the day-to-day world. And I said, okay, I think I've got this something here, and then I explain it to it might have been a friend, it might have been my wife. If they understand it and they see that on a regular basis, that is something that I thought, okay, I've got to take this in and use it. I didn't quite get to the concept of synthetic seniority before the book, but a lot of these other through lines, they're all there. It's about decision making in the real world at a time of AI, and therefore, who is it that we need to be in this day-to-day world? And I'll tell you that in the beginning I started off with 20 skills, and 20 skills is just too much for a book. And I just thought, thinking about it now makes me feel a bit sick that I have to write about 20 skills. But I went from 20 down to 10, and actually realized that these things are grouped up in a very clear way. And when I present that back to the organizations who help with my research, and you align it back and pattern match it to all of the very powerful work that's been done by World Economic Forum and McKinsey and all of the researchers and all of the institutes that are doing this kind of area, I was like, okay, this is the thing, and this is the thesis. There's this thing around judgment, and there's a thing around human skills. And when you take that concept to people loved it. And so that's when I knew that I had something.
I'm really looking forward to reading the book and kind of getting into myself, Rahim. Before we finish up, you're an advocate for AI. You're obviously very keen on the future and what it looks like. Is there anything that worries you?
What worries me is that we skew too quickly towards AI. Time and time again, I am seeing organizations that are cutting staff quickly. I was speaking with one organization, and my thesis is you should look at the human first and see what you can do when you augment them, and then see what you need to do after that. And a lot of companies will be just saying, okay, cost base needs to be reduced, and that's what they're looking at. And I put this scenario to them, and I said, look, what happens if you were able to cut your global workforce by 90%? And they looked at me and goes, oh, that's not possible. I said, look, let's take this scenario, though, that you're able to take the whole organization, automate it, you're able to create all these agentic workflows, you do all of this stuff. You reduce the number of individuals by 90%. Would you take that option? And they looked at me for a time, and I thought, I think that they're going to. I thought they were thinking that's an exciting proposition, but I think that got them to think that it's unviable to be thinking in that way. And I think they thought about, okay, this becomes a vacuous place or a vacuous organization which doesn't have a heart or a soul. And so, the thing that worries me is that companies will cut too fast, too quickly, and then try and go back to the old world, and then realize that they've lost the wisdom They've lost all that expertise that they had. They lost the talent of people that they've had for many years they've been building. They've lost people at certain levels of the rung within their organization. And then there'll be a net, they'll be in a worse world. So I really encourage organizations to think differently and not just think about cost base. Really look at revenue upside, look at augmenting the teams that you have with the right types of skills, human skills plus AI, and the right type of AI. You don't necessarily need to use all this LLMs all the time. I've seen organizations that are using specific tools in specific instances, and not necessarily LLMs, but tools that are helping their workplace. And it might be legal, for example, where you're using a specific tool to do certain things. But really think about things from an upside perspective rather than reducing cost base. And that's where I'd draw the line.
I think it's great advice. Before we finish up, Rahim, for someone listening today and they want to do a self-assessment, am I fit for the future? Have you got any advice for them?
Well, I mean, there's a free tool that I've got available on my site, and I'm not sure if you even knew that, but thanks for teeing it up. If you go to superskillsbook.com/diagnostic, that's superskillsbook.com/diagnostic. There is it's like a partner questionnaire which gives you for 20 minutes you answer all of these questions, and it really gives you a view on how dependent you are on AI, how you need to think about AI. There's different personas, and I've sent it around to a few people, and it's going slowly viral in the background. So it's worth having a play around with it, spending the 20 minutes really understanding where you sit, and coming back to it maybe in a month's time and 2 months' time to really understand how you're using AI. Are you becoming dependent on AI? Should you be becoming more dependent in certain areas? Are you using it for speed, or are you using it for decision making? Those are the things that I'd say. And if you go through that process, this is completely free, so I'm not going to make any money from it. If you go through that process, you will start to think in a slightly different way. There's some really interesting questions that are not. Then it's not very techy. It's for anyone who's of any ilk, any age. We've got some kids who've gone through it as well. It'll make you feel that you've got a path that you can go down over the coming months and years.
That's excellent. So I'm going to ask the listeners, if you do a self-diagnostics, please let us know how you got on and the value you got from it. Rahim, it was lovely having you on today. Huge insights there. Best of luck with the book. People can look up SuperSkills. It'll be out shortly. And best of luck with the future.
Francis, been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.